Well, hello. I'm Carl Wenning, and I'm with the Twin City Amateur Astronomers. Because of the recent pandemic associated with COVID-19, we are making our talks associated with our previously scheduled 2020 public viewing sessions at Sugar Grove Nature Center available online for your listening pleasure. So without further ado, let's go ahead and begin. And I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint presentation here, and we'll go forward with that. So my topic today is Mars and the events of 2020. 2020 is going to be an interesting year as far as the planets go. And things are occurring now, they'll be occurring throughout the rest of the year. And most of these activities are things that you can observe from simply being at home, stepping out your door. So if you're trying to practice social distancing, you needn't get together with anybody. You don't even need to take out a telescope. All you need to do is simply step outside the door in the morning or the evening or maybe the middle of the night and simply look up. These events tend to be pretty bright because they're going to be dealing with planets. And as a result, you don't have to worry about removing yourself to a dark sky location in order to see these. So let's go ahead and briefly talk about what's coming up here. We've got a couple of things here that we can talk about here today. And what we've got here, first off, is Mars. Mars is really the showstopper for the year because it's going to do some very interesting things here. Now, as you might know, both the Earth and the planet Mars are going around the sun. And because Earth is on an orbit which is a little bit smaller, it's inside the orbit of Mars, the Earth goes around faster than does Mars. And Earth goes around, obviously, Earth goes around the sun every 365 days. And every 1.9 years, we loop Mars. That is, once every 1.9 years, it turns out that Mars appears opposite the sky, opposite the sun in the sky for us, and of course that's the time of its closest approach. It's other things happening too during that time. We'll talk about these in detail, but let's look ahead to October 13th when the planet Mars is roughly closest to the Earth. Right now, the planet Mars is found in the morning sky, and it's moving eastward among the stars of the zodiac, and it's going to be brightening quite a bit over the next few months. So as we get here to the time late summer, it's going to start making an impressive 13-degree retrograde loop, actually zigzag this year, which will be rather interesting to watch for, taking place over a period of a few months. So these aren't the only participants in our events of this year. We've got other planets here. Of course, you'll see the great ringed wonder here in the upper left-hand corner. That's Saturn, Jupiter, the giant one here. It's shown on the right-hand side. And those are actually both dominating the morning sky, along with Mars right now. To the lower left corner here, we'll see the planet Venus, which is dominating the western evening sky at this moment. And of course, little old Mercury, the last of these pictures here, is zipping around the sun as usual, staying pretty close to the sun. And it's pretty hard to see most of the time. In fact, I suspect the vast majority of our listeners and viewers here today have probably never seen Mercury. We're going to tell you about when you get out there and actually do that. So moving ahead, this is what the sky currently looks like if you could simply take a telescope and looking at all these objects that are of interest, the major ones at least. This is what they would roughly look like in a telescope. Venus, of course, would show a beautiful crescent. We would not see the surface detail because this is a cloudless image of Venus, just simply showing its surface. You know, it's covered with a heavy carbon dioxide atmosphere, which generally appears white to us viewers here on Earth. Mars, of course, here in the upper right shows us its facial features, topographic features of the landscape, different colorations running from a nice ruddy orange through even blacks and grays. Saturn here of course, looks pretty small. It's interesting, it looks smaller than Venus. That's because Venus is much closer to the Earth is right now than is Saturn. So there's two things that really affect how large a planet appears to be in our sky in terms of its angular size. One of those, of course, is obvious, its physical size, and the other is its distance. And these two play off against one another, making an object look larger or smaller. And then, of course, Jupiter in the lower left right now would look as large as anything in the planetary system here, larger than Venus. Of course, we know it's massively larger than Venus. It's you could probably put more than 1,000 Venuses inside of Jupiter. So it looks Jupiter looks quite large because it is, in fact, incredibly large despite its great distance. If you've been watching the sky here the last couple of weeks with us, especially on Facebook, the Trend City Amateur Astronomers does maintain a Facebook page. It's pretty active. We typically post things online once, twice, 3 times a day. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But one of the things that we've had a chance to see in the last couple of weeks has been Venus. And if you've got lucky enough to have a set of binoculars and we're watching the skies, on April 3rd, this particular event occurred. Unfortunately, it was cloudy. I personally saw Venus among the background stars, including the Pleiades star cluster on April 2nd and April 4th, but never saw the closest approach as shown here. But again, watching to see what the TCAA posts on its Facebook page can make for some very rewarding mornings and evenings. I'm out almost every clear night looking up for planetary objects as well as satellites. So in the morning sky, if you've been watching here the last couple of weeks, you've had a chance to see that there's been a beautiful tag team match going on between Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars, especially Mars zooming by Jupiter and then Saturn, and the moon showing up from time to time here in the morning sky. And getting up early, if you like, you don't mind getting up at 5:30 in the morning, taking a look over there towards the southeast, you'll see this beautiful configuration of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars. And like I say, from time to time, the moon showing up as well. But we'll keep you up to the speed on all these things, but just keep an eye on our Facebook page. Make sure you like us and follow us on the Facebook site. And if you don't see our post, just simply go to our Facebook page. You can simply, under your finder, type in TCAA, and it'll bring you up to our Facebook page. Another thing that we tend to watch a lot around town here is around very, very bright passages of the International Space Station, ISS, sometimes called Zarya in Russian. And you will see that a lot of nights we're posting there on the Facebook page some information about, when the satellite is first visible, when it's going to move across the sky, reaching its highest elevation above the horizon, and then even sometimes disappearing into the shadow of the Earth. Quite fascinating. Sometimes it passes by things like the planets or the moon or other bright stars, and it's very easy to pick out. This International Space Station oftentimes gets nearly as bright as Venus is currently in the evening sky, which if you've been looking up, you realize is really quite bright. So again, Facebook's the way to go. Now, the great event for 2020 is going to be this impressive loop of the planet Mars among the background of the stars of Pisces, the fishes, as you'll see here. And this is a nice little graphic that comes to us from inthesky.org. And you can get these images. You can create your images using the online resources there. But you will see that during the time when Mars is opposite the sun, right around that time for a couple of weeks before that closest approach, which will be on the 13th of October, for a couple of weeks, the planet is going to be moving to the west among the background of stars. And it's going to execute a nice Z in the sky. Sometimes they're loops, upwards loops or downward loops, and sometimes they're Z's and sometimes S's. But this year we're going to have a nice letter Z traced out by Mars in the sky. And this backing up motion is not real. It's only an apparent motion, and it results from the Earth going by Mars in its orbit. Because the Earth is on an inner track compared to the Mars orbit, Earth moves faster and it zooms by good old planet Mars. Mars appears to go backward for a while, very much like somebody's driving by in a car. There's a bicyclist on the road driving along. The car drives past the bicyclist. And even though we know that they are both going forward, the driver in the car, the faster moving vehicle, sees the bicyclist first in the front window, then the side window, and then the rear window as it goes rushing by. So the planet Mars will appear to go backwards as the faster moving Earth overtakes it and leaves it in the wake a little bit later on this year. So we can take a look here. This is April 25th. This is what the configuration of the planets is on this particular date. You'll see at the center of our solar system here with its 4 terrestrial planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. And you of course see Earth there, and you'll notice that you can sight the sun from the Earth, and just to the left of the sun here, you'll see Venus, and very close to the sun, somewhat behind it is Mercury, probably too close to the sun to be seen. In the glare of the sun, it's lost. And of course, looking off to the far right of the sun, you'll happen to see Mars. So this is the arrangement. It's a very interesting little pattern. Notice that the source is in the sky.org. You can create these for any particular day of the year as well. And you'll notice that there's a little informational graphic down here in the lower left-hand corner, where the green portion represents something that's visible all night to us. And you'll notice that Mars is in the area which is kind of a purplish. It says visible all morning. Mercury's in the region here, it says behind the sun. And there's a very pale blue here, blue-green really, visible in the evening. So this explains why we see the planets in the sky as we currently do. And of course, Jupiter and Saturn are out there too, but on this scale, they're far, far outside of our screen. So if you were to take a look at Mars from, say, roughly 30-day intervals from the time of its closest approach, which would be October 13th about, you'll notice that the planet remarkably changes in apparent size. Again, that's because it's getting closer and closer to the Earth. July, August, September, October, it continues to get larger. Then after October 13th here, when it's reaching opposition, then it'll start shrinking, getting smaller and smaller as time goes on, as the Earth leaves it behind. If you take a look at the brightness of Mars between now, here at the end of April, and the time of mid-October, you're going to find that Mars is going to continue to brighten. And that's because we're getting closer and closer to it. And so as that distance decreases, the brightness increases. So right now, it's a fairly bright object, easily seen in the morning sky, but it'll become a very bright object in the October evening sky, reaching a magnitude of -2.5. Not as bright as Venus is currently in our sky, but almost, and it'll really be quite impressive. So if you watch Mars over the next few months up through the time of opposition in October, it's going to brighten by a factor of 16 times. It turns out each magnitude represents a factor of 2.512 times brightness. So keep that in mind. Then, of course, if you want to see where our other planets are at the time of opposition, you'll see here with Mars, and just inside of Mars orbit, you'll notice that's the Earth, and so Mars will appear opposite the sun in the sky. But then, of course, over here, we've got this in this nice blue region, something here which is the Jupiter and Saturn combination, and they are in fact going to be visible in the evening sky at that time. So that's what occurs at the time of opposition of Mars. Now, if we were to step outside one of these evenings and take a look up, here on October 13th, we show you the evening sky at the end of twilight, when the sun is now 18 degrees below the horizon, is no longer contributing light to the nighttime sky. And of course, you'll find here an array of zodiac constellations: Sagittarius, Capricornus, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, and so on. And that's where you're always going to find the planets, among these constellations of the zodiac. In fact, the sun and moon also travel through these regions of the sky, this constellation. The precise path of the sun among the background stars is called the ecliptic. And so we'll talk about that in a few minutes in its relation to the visibilities of things like Mercury. But if you were to go outside on the evening of October 13th, you would find Mars rising opposite the sun. So as the sun goes down, Mars comes up because they are opposite one another in the sky. And there in the western evening sky, southern sky, early evening, you will happen to find Saturn and Jupiter, very pretty. And Venus is out there too. Venus is still quite prominent in our evening sky here. And moving myself over to the side here, you'll see from the diagrams here, April 5th, April 20th, May 5th, May 20th, that the planet, in fact, is getting closer and closer to the Earth. It's inside our orbit. And as a result of being inside of Earth's orbit, it moves faster still than the Earth does, going around the sun. And as it swings by, it's going to show more and more and more of its angular size. It'll become considerably larger over the next couple of months. And the interesting thing about Venus is that its brightness is a function not only of distance, but also of its phase. And a combination of phase and distance will determine its brightness. The greatest brightness of the planet will occur in June here. And of course, it's going to pass between the Earth and the Sun on June 3rd here. And as it does so, it gets brighter and brighter and brighter. And it's quite an interesting little thing here. So it's going to peak, it actually dims out. I'm looking at the scale here, it's backwards. So right now, Venus is close to its greatest brightness. So you'll see here at the beginning of May, the latter part of April here, it's actually it's really peaking at brightness. Then as it goes closer and closer to the sun, it's going to get dimmer. And actually it would not be rather visible because its backside would be visiting us. And so this diagram's not quite what I would expect it to be, but it gives you some sense for the changing brightness of Venus with the passage of time. Moving on then, one of the things that we can see here is a good little old planet Mercury, and it's right down here. One thing to keep in mind is that Mercury is in fact best viewed at only certain times of the year. It doesn't get very far away from the sun, never more than around 19 degrees. And depending on how steeply inclined the ecliptic is, as you see in autumn morning, the ecliptic is quite steeply inclined to the horizon. Spring mornings turns out that the inclination is fairly low. And if you've got a planet like 19 degrees away from the sun, if that distance is mostly upward, it appears pretty high in the sky relative to the sun. But if that 19 degrees is off to the upper right, let's say, it's not very high above the horizon at the same elongation, and so it's not so easy to be seen. So it's when the ecliptic is steeply inclined in the morning sky that of the autumn months, that's when we tend best to see Mercury. So Mercury is best viewed during the spring evenings and autumn mornings because of the orientation of the ecliptic relative to the horizon. And this year, in 2020, November 10th will be the best time to catch Mercury in the time before sunrise. So the rest of the year, it's making some small appearances, but they don't get very far away from the sun because of this weird combination of elongation, that is the angular distance from the sun, and the inclination of the ecliptic relative to Earth's horizon. So we don't get a chance to see it very good too often. But in November, early November, you should start looking for it just before sunrise. And then let's go ahead and take a look at the time of opposition when we have the other planets coming opposite the sun in the sky. Jupiter will be opposite the sun on July 14th, and Saturn, which is very close to Jupiter in the sky, will come into opposition to the sun on July 20th, just a mere 6 days later. And so these will be very, very nicely placed in our western evening sky at that time. And it'll be beautiful to watch. Of course, throughout the night, they're heading west, and here right at the time of opposition. This is a midnight shot that we see right here. And so early in the evening, the two planets will be in the eastern sky. So at the time of opposition. So if we were to take a look at the retrograde of Jupiter this year, you'll notice it's coming along here, moving along towards east among the background of stars of the zodiac. And then shortly around the end of May, it's going to start making its backwards turn. And this time it's going to execute an S in the sky, unlike the Z that we've seen a little bit earlier for Mars. So that's what we're going to have a chance to see there. We've got the good old Saturn as well. It's going to come along here and start doing its retrograde here at right about the same time, and it's going to make a an S-shaped figure 2 in the sky. So always kind of interesting to watch these things over a period of time. Now, what I would recommend that you do here is consider getting yourself a star map, because even in the city here where there's a fair amount of light pollution, you can still pick out major stars and constellations. You're not going to see all the faint stars because they're going to be lost in the bright glare of the light pollution, or even the moon makes it very difficult to see the stars. But you get out on a fairly dark night, get yourself a nice little star map like this, and you can go ahead and study the stars even from in town. If you got bright street lights in your vicinity, try to shade yourself from them, stand behind a tree, go out in the backyard where there's fewer lights visible, and look up from there. If you would like to get a nice star map that looks like the one here, you can get that again from inthesky.org. Or if you would like to have one that's got a lot of explanatory information, it's a 2-pager. I highly recommend it. I use it all the time. It comes from www.skymaps.com. And it's a beautiful download. You can only download 1 month at a time. So the sky map that we see here is drawn for 9 p.m. It's 2100 hours on the 25th of April. So great little things to get your hands on, and at no cost. It's quite nice. So once again here, I just want to tell you, if you want to keep looking up, you can join us on the TCAA Facebook page. This is what it looks like when you log into it. And it shows you our observatory at Sugar Grove Nature Center, where we normally hold our public viewing sessions. But unfortunately, as I said earlier, this year we simply won't be having these events out here because of the pandemic associated with the coronavirus. So I hope you understand we're doing the best we can to keep you updated and informed about the events that are occurring in the sky. And hopefully sometime, if maybe before the summer ends, or at least it gets too cold, we'll hopefully have some sort of a public observing session for you, and we'll get out and enjoy the beautiful planets in the evening sky as well. So there you have it, a quick rundown as to what you might expect to see for the rest of this year. Hope you enjoyed our little presentation. And again, I encourage you strongly to look at Facebook. That's where we post all of our stuff. So I'm Carl Wenning with the Twin Cities Amateur Astronomers, and I thank you for watching. Have a good time. Looking out.